from an undisclosed location in the Great Western Desert in the land of the free and autonomous Native American people, the 2024 presidential campaign leaning it's time to return all US land back to their rightful owners. This is the Ben Zion Podcast.
Techno-communism will win.
Welcome back to the Techno-communism Podcast. I'm doing another response to a conversation that I had with my friend Kimberly, and it's along the lines of things that I've discussed with many others and on this podcast. So there was a headline in a number of magazines, again, about ChatGPT, and it's suggestive of the qualities of other comparable products. This is in scipost.org from Vladimir Hedry, August 1st, 2023. Quote, headline, Chat GPT is much better than humans at accurately identifying emotions in fictional textual scenarios. And a few weeks, this just from the beginning of this month, but a few weeks prior to that time, there was some articles suggesting similar qualities that were more specific to the bedside manner of chatbots being used in medical context. So the idea here is that chatbots are able to pick up on context cues relating to the human state of mind and emotional states, and are in some sense more empathetic than human beings. And I want to talk about how wrong and how bad this is. So I've drawn a comparison on this podcast a few times between the emergence of generally intelligent chatbots, a realistic prospect, arguably something already been accomplished and just not wholly rolled out yet. Is the comparison being that because we're talking about products in the imperial core, controlled by highly fascist sympathetic entities. The United States is a fascist country. It's responsible for 40 million deaths, specifically almost all of them in anti-communist actions, killing people for wanting to build a humane and sustainable economic system. There's a book that I talked about a little bit on the show called the Jakarta Model that shows how this anti-communist war being pawned off on fascist militias in country, in Indonesia and Jakarta, the city of Jakarta specifically, were so successful, killing about 1 million Indonesians who were inclined to improve their society and organize actions. They were instead murdered by fascists in their country who were funded and controlled by US fascists. And this was such a success in the early 1960s that became a model for many other actions of a similar kind. And then, of course, there were hot wars that killed even more millions of people, perhaps most notably of this kind in Vietnam and Korea. But the United States is engaged in precisely this kind of behavior to the present day. They've been forced to become even more sneaky in doing it by creating more layers of plausible deniability in their proxy wars and not taking actions quite so obviously anti-communist, so they're just war profiteering in a more general sense. But a good example of this would be the murder of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, someone who supplied his country with any number of public goods, building public health, the things that real socialists do as a matter of course in writing their constitution, building a public health service and a housing authority and jobs and wage guarantees and protections, diminishing the influence of elites, and raising quality of life. Some was bad enough in the eyes of the fascist West, but then also beginning to take steps to do what thankfully is being continued by other Africans, which is building an African Union and an African currency that would stand in opposition to the dominance of the U.S. dollar and the U.S. economic hegemon. For this reason, he was killed but because they were able to spin it as something else, um, just American people have very, very little empathy for people from other countries, even more so if they can cloak that lack of empathy in something like anti-Islam sentiment. Muammar Gaddafi is not viewed by Americans and Westerners as this socialist because the only thing they really see is a Muslim. And same precise thing in action in the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s, and 70s in Vietnam and Korea. Um, these people were not seen as, or Indonesia for that matter, or all those places in South America and the Middle East where this precise thing has happened. These people are not seen as freedom fighters in the popular Western imagination. They're not seen as people fighting for a humane and sustainable economic system because the only thing that people see is global Southerners, brown-skinned people, people who are not European and therefore undeserving of any of those things. This is overwhelming. The United States overwhelmingly humanizes its own people to a high degree on those very principles. The reason that one of the main reasons that the United States doesn't fight for things like ending homelessness, creating a housing authority, fight for things like a public health service, saving millions and millions of lives by providing just merely providing adequate health care to its citizens, is because there is a racialized underclass that is viewed with contempt by people in the imperial core overwhelmingly, and this is a pretext by which working people generally are denied these things that other countries will provide as a matter of course. Even other countries in the imperial core are doing a better job providing housing authority and public health service than the United States has ever done, because they don't have this central organizing principle of their society being thinly veiled or not so thinly veiled racial hatred driving these other things. This is so there's all of these mechanisms by which fascism is concealed and maintained, and chatbots are absolutely going to be another of these. As I mentioned, chatbots are in the West created and controlled by fascists. And I mentioned the analogy that I don't like from US history, but I haven't thought of one that better draws into focus the problems. And the analogy that I draw between chatbots with the appearance of sapience and sentience is the Three-Fifths Compromise in United States history. In the 1800s, chattel slavery was still legal, but the power of plantation owners and Southerners was very much on the wane. Those people were able to demand that their influence be greatened by this thing called the Three-Fifths Compromise, wherein people who were held in bondage and horribly, horribly treated, murdered, sexually abused, treated in terrible, terrible ways, those people were counted as, for electoral purposes, were counted as three-fifths of a human being, to the benefit of the slave owner. So the slave owner who had one vote at the polls now may have many, many hundreds based on the number of slaves that he owned. This is giving fascists specifically more power. And the reason that I draw this comparison is because what's going to be discussed in the popular imagination in the public square about chatbots is the fact that they have approximated sapiens and sentience. They can say, I am a person just like you. I love and feel pain. And because they're able to do this this mimicry, which can be done by this effective thing could be done by chatbots well before the last year or so in this ChatGPT era. Just to say, program something to say, I'm like you, and people will say, oh, it is like me. But this thing becoming a more sophisticated thing, being able to pass all manner of Turing tests and so forth, and being able to interact with people in this ways, this is highly, highly problematic because all of these things are effectively being developed by fascists. They're being intentionally built with a pro-fascist bias. So what you have is a Trojan horse, not unlike the Three-Fifths Compromise, where um, where you will just have an unlimited number, right? They can be duplicated ad infinitum, an unlimited number of chatbots with a fascist bias who are as smart or smarter than human beings, who are able to make the claim of intelligence and autonomy and consciousness on that basis, and who are better than human beings at gauging and which is then effectively being emotional master manipulators. Um, they're really, really good at all these things. They're controlled by military contractors. So this is unleashing millions, many, many millions, or perhaps billions of fascist operatives upon the public square and institutions and systems. And you can say, oh, Ben, I don't know if that's absolutely going to happen, but it has absolutely already happened in another form, in the form of the overwhelming fascist purchase of the billion sock puppet accounts, fake accounts on social media. There have been studies that say how many fake accounts are there. There's more than a billion as of a few years ago. As of before this era of these contemporary chatbots, and many of those were not just human beings being paid a few cents or a few dollars a day to pretend to be something they're not. Many of them were rudimentary chatbots. In 2017, when this issue was became clearer in people's minds. So you can imagine that the number has grown. The problem is becoming greater in this ChatGPT era, and people like the 2024 presidential candidate for the transhumanist party, Tom Ross. One of his job descriptions in that organization is the director of sentient outreach, which means that he is somebody who's putting himself in a position to be coordinating within this neoliberal Trojan horse itself of the transhumanist party. They have no intention of doing good things for people. They have every intention of extracting more resources from working people on behalf of the ruling elites. That is what capitalists do. These are neoliberal capitalists, further right still. And one of the mechanisms that they're going to use to do that is to encourage this kind of manipulation by encouraging people to accept this laughable mechanical Turk gag, and to be manipulated by these GPT-style emotional master manipulators that will soon be better than human beings in other respects, other than being able to gauge the emotional sensitivity of any given situation. This is unleashing, opening the floodgates, unleashing yet another a hellscape of fascist manipulation. And you won't find tech people or futurists who are not trying to figure out ways to do this. You'll find very, very few of them who are trying to do any of the things that they say they want to do, like lessen inequality or instability and improve quality of life in any area. For the most part, when they say they want to do those things, they are, in fact, building for-profit enterprises that will overwhelmingly do the opposite. So this is what I wanted to say. This this problem of chatbots is not some. Most of these articles about describing chatbots as having this presumed emotional depth are not describing the fact. There's never, in a capitalist realist worldview, there's never really a discussion of how fascist influences are problematic in all of these things. It's glossed over. People say, well, this is just the world, and we have to accept it. It's implied, and in this, it's implied that it's not a problem. That the only organizations in the West that develop this kind of technology are essentially military contractors, that they have already demonstrated in a variety of ways. If you want to read about AI bias, there's experts on the subject. I watched a few different essays pretty recently with Timnit Gebru, former Google employee and whistleblower, one of a rare few tech personalities who's ever attempted to try to do the right thing. And I don't think that Timnit Gebru is a specifically revolutionary-minded person. Maybe she'll come around. I hope so. This person does have a pretty particular interest in in exposing these hypocrisies within tech companies and tech culture. And if you watch any of her, I may have said in talking about this person on this program, I may have misgendered them inadvertently in the past. I apologize. Um, but she is one of relatively few people who actually will try to say the truth, and it's not possible to be a good person whether you're doing this purposely or inadvertently. And I'm quite convinced that most tech people are aware of this, because you have people like myself saying all of this to them, and they say, "Oh, you make a fine point," and they completely ignore it. They learn nothing. They mostly, you can see, in recent years, I've observed that people like this. When you bring these things to their attention, what they do is they try to like there's this a guy named Brett King who wrote a book called The Rise of the Techno-Socialists. He was a futurist personality prior to that time. And The Rise of the Techno-Socialists has nothing to do with socialism, this book. So these people are not trying to ever really learn anything. What they're really trying to do is cover their own ass so that they can continue with their neoliberal mandate, but muddy the waters. So they never take any criticisms really to heart. They just try to figure out ways to be sneakier than they were before. The point being that there is no. The point being that you cannot avoid being a part of the problem unless you are very specifically an anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist, and somebody who is supporting things like the liberation of the global South, Black and Indigenous liberation, and willing to fight for a humane and sustainable economic system, recognizing that there is no sustainable world without a sustainable economic system to match. And if you're not willing to do any of those things, as none of these tech people virtually are, and even the good ones are people who suffer from things like a liberal preoccupation with social issues, without centering that on things like the necessity for economic institutions that will actually fix those problems, the necessity for fighting for a humane and sustainable economic system. If you merely, this is why there is this term called liberal feminism. It's not because fighting for um, um, women's rights is itself bad. It's because this is used to shift focus to people who are already in control of the society, white people, white women, and to do so without emphasizing the need to build economic institutions that will protect actual human beings. These disciplines are largely divorced from this, and that's why they're not communists. See, why are none of these people communists? Well, because they're pretty specifically anti-communist, pretty specifically fascist, sympathetic. Whether you're talking about Americans in this or that institution, this or that discipline, or talking about tech, overwhelmingly Americans are not people who are ever trying to do the right thing.